Imagine your private jet vanishes midair. No radar, no signal, no trace. For 42 minutes. And when it lands, everyone's alive. Except no one remembers seat 32F, because the woman who sat there never existed. She wasn't on the manifest, she wasn't in the footage, but she stopped a hijacking, saved a billionaire's son, landed the jet, then disappeared. No medals, no headlines, just one encrypted message and a new target. Uncover the story no one wanted told, only here on LifeMoral Tales. She sat alone in seat 32F, wearing a plain gray jumpsuit and a baseball cap that shadowed her face. To most, she was invisible, a heavy-set technician with no name worth remembering. The Gulfstream 700 wasn't built for people like her. It was a jet for billionaires, and today it carried one very precious passenger, Ethan Caldwell, the 13-year-old son of Marcus Caldwell, one of the richest men alive. The flight plan was simple: Geneva to New York, clear skies, luxury comfort, top-tier security. Ethan listened to music. His bodyguard sat nearby, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But Nyasha, if that was her real name, knew otherwise. She'd boarded that flight for one reason. Something was going to go very wrong, and she was the only one prepared to stop it. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. No one noticed when the jet went silent over the Atlantic. No radar, no signal, no trace. For 42 minutes. It vanished, and when it reappeared, someone was missing. But that's not where this story ends. It's where it begins.
The Gulfstream 700 sliced through the upper troposphere like a whisper, 33,000 feet and climbing. The sun was setting over the Atlantic, casting a golden sheen across the cloud tops, making everything below feel unreal. Inside the cabin, luxury and calm reigned. Ethan Caldwell had stretched out in his recliner, earbuds in, lost in the soundtrack from a superhero movie. His two ex-Marine bodyguards sat 3 rows behind, half watching, half dozing, lulled by the steady hum of the engines. The pilot chatted calmly with air traffic control over the North Atlantic corridor. Everything was on schedule. And then, it stopped. No bang, no warning, just silence. Air traffic control stared at the radar screens as the Gulfstream 700 disappeared mid-transmission. One moment it was a green blip among the transatlantic flow, the next, gone. No emergency signal, no change in altitude, no debris, just digital death. Inside the jet, nothing felt wrong, no turbulence, no sudden drop. But something had shifted. The cabin lights flickered, barely noticeable. The Wi-Fi signal died. Satellite phones went dead. The cabin crew exchanged uneasy glances. One of the attendants tapped on the cockpit door. No response. From the back row, seat 32F, Nyasha noticed it all. She didn't move. Not yet. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers slightly curled, the way someone trained in violence learns to hold them, relaxed but ready. Her eyes scanned the cabin, subtle but constant. Something had gone dark, literally and figuratively. The jet systems weren't just down, they were being choked. A blackout at this altitude with this kind of tech didn't just happen, and Nyasha knew it. She shifted slightly, pretending to adjust her seatbelt, but her eyes stayed locked on a specific detail. 2 men, seated near the galley, wearing matching service badges. They'd boarded last minute during the refueling stop in Geneva. She remembered their walk, too coordinated, the way they avoided eye contact, how one of them rested his hand just a little too close to his hip where no tools belonged. They weren't crew, they weren't passengers, and now the Gulfstream was flying blind. Nyasha didn't panic. She'd seen chaos before, Mogadishu, Fallujah, and Mali, especially Mali. But this was different. It wasn't a battlefield. Not yet. She exhaled slowly. The sky outside was endless, but inside this jet, time had just frozen, and Nyasha, the ghost in 32F, was already counting down.
The Gulfstream 700 touched down on NATO soil like a wounded bird, rough but alive. Soldiers swarmed the runway as the jet screeched to a halt, smoke curling off the wheels. Paramedics rushed on board. The pilot was unconscious, the co-pilot missing. The passengers shaken but breathing. 2 men lay zip-tied in the galley, one with a broken arm, the other bleeding from a knife wound. The boy was safe, but the woman who saved him, gone. The rear service hatch was open. No one saw her leave. No security footage captured her face. Her name, if it ever existed, had already vanished from the manifest. Just a placeholder. Auxiliary Tech, clearance level 9. By the time the press got wind of the incident, the story had already been rewritten. A malfunction. AI-powered autopilot saves jet. No foul play suspected. Marcus Caldwell stood in front of cameras, stoic, polished. He thanked technology. He praised protocol. But when one reporter asked about unconfirmed heroics, his eyes flickered, just once. "If someone was there," he said slowly, "they don't need my thanks. They know." In a safe house in Lisbon, a woman closed her flip phone. No calls, no texts, just one encrypted message. New coordinates, a new target, a new war. She packed lightly, one bag, one knife, no name. In his Manhattan penthouse, Marcus Caldwell opened the wall safe. Inside, a single photograph. Kandahar, 2010. A younger him, dusty and smiling, arm around a fierce woman in fatigues. Nyasha, the only person who ever saved his life twice. He wired $10 million to an account she'd never ask about. No note, no words, just a debt played in silence. The world moved on. Headlines faded. But one boy kept drawing the face of a woman no one else remembered. In his mind, her eyes were clear, focused, tired, and kind. Nyasha burned the safe house at dawn. No footprints, no fingerprints, just ashes and a closed circuit. Her war was never about glory, never about medals or memory. It was about the kid who shouldn't have died, the mission no one else would take, the silence that saves lives. Heroes don't need spotlights. They need purpose.
From the shadows of seat 32F, Nyasha didn't flinch. While panic began to ripple through the cabin, flight attendants whispering nervously, passengers pulling off headphones and peering down the aisle, she sat perfectly still. Her cap was low, her hands calm, her breathing measured. To anyone looking, she was just an overweight technician in an ill-fitting jumpsuit. Unremarkable, easy to ignore. That was her greatest weapon. The signal blackout, the flicker in the cabin lights, the dead electronics. These weren't glitches. They were signatures. Someone had just taken control of the plane from the inside, and Nyasha recognized the pattern instantly. She'd seen it before, in Mali. That memory crashed through her like cold water. 5 years ago, she led a 6-man special ops team on a mission that was supposed to be clean, simple extraction, in and out. But the intel was rotten. The warlord they were sent to retrieve was bait. The ambush came fast. RPGs, gunfire, screaming in the headset. Nyasha dragged her second-in-command, Daniels, half a mile under fire before a grenade took out her comms and her team. She was the only one who made it home. The brass called it a tragic miscommunication. She called it betrayal. Now, inside a jet full of civilians, the signs were too familiar. Precision timing, tech-savvy sabotage, masked intent. And she was the only one who noticed. Nyasha's gaze swept forward, landing on the 2 men near the galley, still seated, but tense,
alert, wearing matching crew lanyards, but they didn't talk to anyone, didn't move like staff, didn't blink enough. One of them rested his hand over a cargo pouch clipped to his belt. The other kept checking the cockpit door. She'd seen that kind of readiness before, in training, in war zones, men who knew exactly when they were going to move and what they'd do when they got there. Nyasha exhaled slowly, anchoring herself in the moment. The passengers were on edge, but not afraid yet. The illusion of normalcy still held. That illusion would shatter in minutes. And when it did, she needed to be ready, not as a passenger, not as a bystander, but as the only person on board trained to stop what was coming. She wasn't here by accident. Someone tipped her off. Someone wanted her on this flight. She didn't know who, didn't care. All she knew was this. Whatever was about to happen, she had one job: stop it, no matter what it cost.
The service hatch was 3 feet from her boots. Nyasha shifted, slow as breath, her bulk belying precision. The passengers were distracted, some standing, others murmuring about the blackout. One flight attendant knocked on the cockpit door again, voice wavering. No response. The 2 imposters, Victor and Luca, were still seated, tense, waiting, timing something. So was she. She reached down, fingering the seam in the carpet near row 32. There, just as she remembered from the Gulfstream schematics, was a maintenance latch. It blended in, intended only for authorized crew during pre-flight checks. But Nyasha had studied this layout 3 nights ago in a safe house in Zurich. She knew exactly what was beneath it. A crawl space, wiring, power lines, and, most importantly, a bypass node to the auxiliary systems. The latch was mechanical, no security code, just an old-school twist lock. She palmed a hairpin, flattened and slightly curved, tucked inside the cuff of her jumpsuit. It clicked once, twice. The hatch opened silently, just an inch. That was all she needed. She glanced forward. Luca was turned slightly, fiddling with a panel near his seat. Victor was watching the cockpit. Perfect. Nyasha dropped low, slipped through the hatch and pulled it closed behind her. Instant dark. The crawl space was tight, barely enough for her shoulders. Her elbows scraped metal as she moved, inching forward on her stomach like a soldier through a tunnel. Sweat pooled at her lower back. The air was hot, humming with electricity. She found the bypass junction fast, a small box, palm-sized, bolted to the wall, warm to the touch. She felt the signal pulsing through it, the jammer's heartbeat. Too regular, too strong. Military grade. But even the best systems had seams. She unclipped her multi-tool from her ankle holster, flipped open the wire stripper. One fast slice, then another. She rerouted a connection, introduced a cross current, just enough to create a rhythm stutter in the jammer's output. On the surface, nothing would change, but under the skin, the system would begin to drift, like a pulse skipping a beat. Somewhere on a NATO base in the Mediterranean, a lone radar operator would see a flicker. Not enough to track, just enough to wonder. Nyasha backed away from the box, every movement calculated. Her fingers trembled, not with fear, but with timing. She had opened a door. Now she had to be ready for what might come through.
The crawl space vibrated faintly as footsteps thundered above. The hijackers were moving now. Nyasha lay still, her cheek pressed to cold steel. From the gaps in the vent grates overhead, she saw Luca pacing. He was tense, tapping on a handheld device, scowling at the faint stutter in the jammer's signal. It had begun. She backed slowly toward the hatch under row 29, her exit point. But she needed a window, seconds of distraction, something to break their rhythm. She had no weapons, not yet. Just her hands and one smart kid, Ethan. She waited for Luca to move out of sight, then tapped twice, soft and quick, on the vent above the boy's seat. Ethan froze. His head turned slightly, eyes darting. He saw her. Just a glimpse. But she nodded, once, sharp. His breathing hitched. He understood. He reached down, casually knocked his water bottle to the floor. It rolled, right to Victor's feet. The hijacker cursed, startled. The sound broke the tension. Luca looked up. Victor turned toward the boy. And that's when Nyasha moved. She slid the hatch open silently and flowed upward like smoke. One knee down, one hand out. Luca was nearest. She didn't hesitate. Her hand clamped over his mouth as the other wrapped around his neck. One twist, a dull crack. He went limp, not dead, but out cold. She dragged his body behind the galley curtain, snatched the stun gun from his belt, and patted down his jacket. Zip ties. Perfect. She bound his wrists and ankles fast and tight, then slipped the device into her jumpsuit. The passengers stared, silent and pale. Ethan didn't blink. Victor, still talking to the cockpit, hadn't noticed yet. Nyasha raised her finger to her lips. Stay silent. Stay low. One flight attendant nodded, eyes wide with fear, but also recognition. She saw it now. This wasn't just some technician. This was the one chance they had. Nyasha crouched behind a food cart, breathing slow, recalibrating. One down. But Victor was the real threat. Bigger, sharper, and still in control. For now. But the tide had shifted. The silence was cracking. The passengers weren't panicking. They were waiting, watching, hoping. And hope, Nyasha knew, was a dangerous fuel. She adjusted her cap, tightened her grip on the stun gun, and narrowed her eyes toward the front of the plane. It wasn't over, but it was beginning.
Victor's boots struck the aisle hard, each step sharp, purposeful. "Luca!" he barked. "Status!" Silence. He stopped near the galley. Something was wrong. He could feel it, the change in the air, the tension behind the curtain. Then he saw it. No Luca, just a food cart tilted, and a pair of boot prints that didn't belong. Victor spun. Too late. Nyasha was already moving. She surged from cover like a sledgehammer. Low, fast, brutal. The stun gun snapped once, arcing bright blue. Victor twisted, deflecting the charge with his forearm. Sparks danced across his jacket. He staggered, but didn't fall. He was stronger than she expected. Faster, too. He struck with a brutal hook. Nyasha ducked, rolled, came up behind him and drove an elbow into his spine. He roared, spun, caught her with a knee to the ribs. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. She gritted her teeth, blocked his next punch, grabbed his jacket collar, and slammed him into the sidewall. Passengers screamed. Ethan ducked under his seat. Victor reached for something, inside his sleeve, a flash of metal, a blade. Nyasha pivoted, the knife slashing across her upper arm. Blood bloomed, warm and fast. But she didn't back off. She stepped in, absorbing the pain, twisted his wrist, and jammed the stun gun into his ribs, full power. He convulsed, dropped the knife. She kicked it away. He wasn't done. He lunged, fists flying, but she was ready. She grabbed his shoulder, yanked him forward, and drove her forehead into his face. Bone met bone. He reeled. She tackled him down the aisle, past rows of terrified passengers, slamming him into a seatback so hard the frame bent. Victor hit the floor, gasping, groaning. Nyasha didn't wait.
She straddled him, zip-tied his wrists before he could move, then looped a second tie around his ankles, tight, military tight. He thrashed once, then stilled. It was over. For now. Blood dripped from her arm. Her breath came in short bursts. She stood, wiped her face, scanned the cabin. The passengers? Silent, shaking, eyes wide. Ethan looked up from behind a seat. She nodded at him. He nodded back. Nyasha turned to the cockpit. It was time. She limped forward, past rows of shell-shocked strangers. No applause, no thank you. Just the hum of engines and the scent of adrenaline. The battle was won. But the war was waiting behind that cockpit door.
The cockpit door was ajar, barely. Nyasha nudged it with her foot. It creaked open to a scene of chaos. The pilot slumped over the controls, a gash bleeding above his eyebrow. The co-pilot's seat was empty, smeared with blood. Instruments blinked erratically. The autopilot was still engaged, holding course, but not the original one. She stepped inside. This wasn't just a reroute. The coordinates on the nav screen showed an unlisted airstrip in Eastern Europe, a strip long enough for a Gulf Stream, but buried deep inside hostile territory. Victor's plan wasn't ransom. It was relocation, extraction, a full takeover. Nyasha slid into the pilot's seat. Her arm throbbed, blood soaking through the jumpsuit, but her hands were steady. She toggled the controls, checking engine status, fuel reserves, weather conditions. Fuel was low. They'd burned too much circling in blackout. She leaned over, checked the transponder. It was dead, overridden by the jammer. But her earlier sabotage had worked. The pulse was weak now, erratic. There was a window. She keyed into the military band, encrypted frequency. NATO command. This is Gulfstream 700, civilian aircraft, hijacked, hostiles neutralized, pilot injured, request emergency landing vector. Static. Then, Gulfstream 700, this is NATO Southern Command, identify. No time, sending Omega ping, emergency clearance protocol Delta 2. Ping confirmed, you're clear for runway 27, Crete Air Base, descend to 5,000, vector 190.
The moment peace settled, it shattered. A loud crash echoed from the galley. Passengers screamed. Nyasha spun, sprinting back. Victor, bleeding, zip ties snapped, was standing, swaying, eyes wild with fury. One hand gripped Ethan by the collar, the other held a knife, slick with someone's blood. Luca, dazed, leaned against a seat, barely upright. Step back, Victor snarled, dragging Ethan into the aisle. The blade pressed to the boy's throat. One wrong move, and this flight would end in tragedy. Nyasha froze halfway down the aisle. Her eyes locked with Ethan's, terrified but steady. The kid had fire. "I said drop it!" Victor shouted. She let the stun gun fall. It hit the floor with a soft thud. Passengers cowered. One woman began to pray aloud. Nyasha raised her hand slowly, every move deliberate. Her boot, meanwhile, inched toward a small panel, unmarked, almost invisible, just beside the cockpit door. She remembered it from the schematics. Cabin pressure override. It was risky, but so was doing nothing. She said, "Let the boy go." Victor sneered. "You think this ends with him? You think Crete will let you land?" She didn't answer. Her toe tapped the panel's release. A soft hiss filled the cabin. Then the roar.
Oxygen masks dropped. Wind surged through the cabin as pressure dropped just enough to disorient. People screamed. Loose papers flew. The jet groaned. Victor staggered. His grip on Ethan loosened. Now, Nyasha launched forward, body low, fast. She slammed into Victor, driving an elbow into his ribcage. The knife flew, spinning down the aisle. Ethan dropped, rolling away. Victor lashed out. His fist caught her jaw. She reeled, shook it off, grabbed his wrist, twisted until bone cracked. He screamed. Luca tried to lunge. Nyasha turned, grabbed the fallen knife, and threw. It buried itself in Luca's shoulder. He dropped. She dove onto Victor, driving him to the floor. Zip ties again, this time tighter. Blood smeared her face, her arms, her hands. She reset the pressure from the cockpit panel. The roar subsided. The cabin stabilized. People cried, hugged, gasped for breath. Ethan crawled to her side. "Are you okay?" she asked. He nodded. "You?" She managed a tired smile. "We're getting there." Crete was now 20 miles out. And Nyasha? She had one last thing to do. Land the damn plane. The runway lights of Crete Air Base blinked on the horizon like a promise. Close, but not close enough. Nyasha re-entered the cockpit, breathing hard, blood drying on her sleeves. The pilot was semi-conscious, whispering something incoherent. She checked his vitals. He'd live, but flying was out of the question. It was all on her now. She slid into the seat, pulled the headset over her ears, and keyed the mic. Gulfstream 700, lining up for emergency descent, runway 27. No trained pilot at the controls, requesting assisted telemetry. A voice crackled through. Telemetry ready, auto guidance on standby, winds at 12 knots. Cross, you got this. She didn't answer. Her eyes locked on the HUD. Altitude 4,800 feet, fuel low, nose slightly off vector. She nudged the yoke. The plane dipped. The jet rattled as turbulence kicked in. The Gulfstream wasn't designed for this kind of manual override, not by someone trained in jungle extractions, not airfields. But she remembered enough. Enough from emergency sims, enough from watching real pilots panic under pressure. The runway grew larger in the windshield, fast. Back in the cabin, passengers braced, eyes wide behind oxygen masks. Someone whispered a prayer. Ethan gripped the armrest, silent, steady, watching her. Nyasha's hands trembled once, only once. She lowered the flaps, reduced throttle, felt the crosswind push hard from the left. She leaned into it, adjusting angle, reading the wind like a sniper reads a target. Too high. She tilted, wheels down. Altitude, 1,000 feet. Airspeed still hot. Too fast. She didn't blink. "Come on," she whispered. The wheels hit, bounced, skidded, then gripped. The cabin screamed, luggage shifted, the jet veered slightly left, but Nyasha straightened it with a hard pull on the yoke. Brakes deployed, reverse thrust kicked in. They slowed and stopped, dead center on the runway. Silence. Then slowly, the sound of crying, laughing, prayers answered. Nyasha exhaled, hard, pulled off the headset, checked the pilot. Still breathing. She wiped her hands on her jumpsuit, stood, and walked back into the cabin. Passengers stared at her like she wasn't real. She didn't speak. At the rear, she grabbed her small pack, checked that her tools were still inside. No applause, no attention. Just the rear service hatch, still unlocked. As military responders boarded from the front, she dropped through the hatch, boots hitting tarmac behind the landing gear. One glance at the base lights. Then, she walked into the dark. Unseen, unthanked, untraceable. Just how she liked it.
By morning, the headlines were already written. Private jet glitch averted by AI autopilot.
Tech billionaire's son safe after flight diverts to military base. No threat detected, just a technical anomaly. Not a word about hijackers. Not a word about Nyasha. Not a single mention of the woman in 32F. At Crete Air Base, passengers were escorted off the Gulf Stream by armed guards and debriefed in private rooms. Phones were confiscated, statements taken. Then the real papers came. Non-disclosure agreements backed by federal threats. Most signed without protest. A few hesitated. A journalist refused. He was flagged, detained, then quietly banned from air travel for national security inconsistencies. The next week, he published a glowing feature on Caldwell's latest tech launch. Nothing about the flight. It wasn't just a media strategy. It was a full system lockout. Caldwell's legal team worked with military liaisons. Footage was scrubbed, passenger records altered. Nyasha's entry? Deleted. Her name, face, seat number replaced with a placeholder crew designation. Even the Omega distress signal she triggered was reclassified as a NATO test ping and archived under Level 9 clearance. Someone high up wanted her gone from history. And Marcus Caldwell? He said nothing. At the press conference, he stood before the cameras, calm and grateful, praised aviation innovation, applauded the flawless emergency systems. When one reporter asked about an unconfirmed female passenger, Caldwell gave a small smile. If someone was there, they don't need public credit. They already got what matters. Only one person heard the weight behind those words. In Lisbon, on a worn-out mattress in a safe house lit by one bare bulb, Nyasha watched the press feed from a cracked burner phone. She didn't smile, didn't blink. She just listened. The silence was louder than applause. Later that night, she found the offshore account. $10 million, clean, untraceable, wired from a shell company 2 layers removed from Caldwell's holdings. No name, no message, but she knew. He remembered Kandahar. She closed the laptop, burned the SIM card, and wiped her bloodied knife clean. The world thought the plane had landed itself, that a child had been saved by software. No one would write books or make movies about her. That was fine. She didn't want legacy. She wanted clarity, the kind that only came when no one knew your name. And in that quiet, forgotten corner of the world, the ghost of C-32F vanished once more.
This isn't a story about high-tech jets or billion-dollar secrets. It's a story about purpose, about choosing to act when no one's watching, and walking away before anyone says thank you. Nyasha didn't save that plane because someone ordered her to. She wasn't there for recognition or redemption or revenge. She acted because it was the right thing to do, because when chaos knocked, she answered without hesitation. In a world obsessed with credit and spotlight, that kind of quiet heroism is rare. And that's the point. She didn't need her name remembered. She needed that kid to live. Too often, we believe heroes come with capes, press conferences, and hashtags. But the truth is, some of the greatest acts of courage happen off-camera, in hospitals, shelters, classrooms, and yes, in row 32F of a plane no one remembers. And there's another truth. Systems fail. Tech malfunctions. Power gets misused. But human clarity, when sharpened by pain and purpose, can cut through any storm. Nyasha was a ghost not because she was invisible, but because she chose to be. And maybe that's the lesson. We don't have to be seen to make an impact. We don't need permission to do what's right. And we don't need applause to know our worth. So the next time life hands you a moment where no one else will act, remember her. Be the shadow who shows up. Be the silence that saves. Be the ghost in someone's 32F. If this story left you speechless, now's your chance to speak. Drop a comment. Do you believe stories like this actually happen? People saving lives in silence, then disappearing without a trace? Or do you think it's just a myth, built to comfort us in a chaotic world? We want to hear what you think. If this made you feel something, hope, anger, awe, then hit that like button so more people find stories that matter. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week's story is even darker. The assassination at the charity gala and the waitress no one remembered. One bullet, one missing guest, one woman who saw it coming. You don't want to miss it. So share this video with someone who still believes in silent heroes. And if you ever sit in the back row of a flight, take a second look. You never know who's watching.